This happened on the 30th of December, 2013, during the hours of 2:30 a.m. and 4 a.m. I would like to stress that what I express in this story is not of imagination or of games, but something evil and mysterious myself and two friends had encountered. I would like to note that we were under the influence of weed, however, nowhere near the point in which it would affect our ability to tell reality from fiction. Not to mention, I have been smoking for years, so I could handle myself. Anyway, it was a fairly quiet and dark night. I and two friends, we'll call them M and C, had been planning on going out to let off some fireworks near a park near C's house. I would like to stress that C lives right in front of a very mysterious open and endless forest just behind a residential area. We had entered the forest numerous times before. Out of all the mysterious and unquestionable evil experiences we had shared there, this was the one that made us want to seek out what we've been seeing, hearing, and feeling. Following this experience, we have encountered many weird and unknown things from this forest. From two mysterious brightening little red dot meters in front of us disappearing and appearing constantly, to the sound of footsteps being distorted all around us, and also unknown carving-like images in trees, although none quite as blatant and direct as what we saw that morning. We had all decided to head down to the park as we were eager to finally let off the fireworks. As we initially started walking down, say about 100 meters from the entrance, I could see a sudden change in facial expression on C. When confronted, he would deny feeling worried or anything, and would keep stressing that he was keen to see the fireworks. We approached the entrance when I noticed that both C and M had mysteriously gone quiet. Nothing was said, and we entered the forest. As we were walking, we noticed that bats had constantly been trying to swoop at us, and it was as if there was a never-ending amount of them. We decided to have a quick stop for our cigarettes, and me and C sat down on a log. The one thing that still brings goosebumps down my spine is the fact that someone as loud and cheerful as M had not spoken a word, and instead of sitting down with us, turned his back to us and just kept looking out into the bushes and trees as if he was observing something. When I asked what was wrong, he simply replied that we needed to take a piss, and I dismissed it as anything out of the normal. This is when things turned very eerie. We all decided to hurry up and get out of the woods and to the park as soon as possible, as we all started to get a very weird feeling, a feeling as if we were being watched by something or someone that really did not appreciate our presence. The next part of the path we took is somewhat of a sharp and blind bend in which you are not able to see anything past it until you are actually on it. I and C had been in front the whole time, and M a few meters behind us, still very quiet. It was when we had just stepped foot on the blind path that we saw it. It began at the very corner of my eye. A blinding, bright light appeared which lasted a split second, as if it was diminishing. The face and outline of something or someone appeared merely a meter in front of us. At this moment, not one word was said. Instead, all three of us were frozen in shock. I suddenly had the urge to run as far away from this thing and not look back. The second I started running, C and M followed. Now, I would just like to note that I am a religious person, and that throughout this experience the Lord's Prayer was constantly playing back in my mind, although this was not intentional. It was as if my own mind was doing it without even me noticing. We had finally gotten to the entrance. Throughout what seemed to be a merely 5-minute sprint, the whole way back endlessly and endlessly, the amounts of bats were constantly following us and swooping right behind us. It was when we exited, and all tried to regain our thoughts and breath, that I saw the absolute look of fear on C and M's face. I'm not denying that I hadn't just gone through one of the most terrifying experiences in my life, but the look I seen on specifically C's face was something I could not explain with words. We all finally decided to walk away from the forest along the outskirts path and find a suitable quick area we could let off the fireworks and go back home. These next experiences are what solidified to us that what we saw was no mere illusion. Something was following us and wanted us far away from there. After 10 or so minutes following the path, We found a spot. As I was walking down towards it, I felt a sudden pull as if something was making or wanting me to follow the direction into the woods. This was quickly dismissed and ignored. This is our last mysterious experience of the night before we decide to leave. As I and M were sitting down ready to light the fireworks, we noticed C standing near a meter or so behind us. We asked what was wrong with him, and he said these very words. "I can sense the fear," in a voice which I had never heard C use before. And after a minute of questioning C what the hell he was on about, we heard one of the scariest sounds or screeches I have ever heard in my life. The sound is embedded. This was no normal creature sound. In fact, there was absolutely nothing behind us, as we were in an illuminated area and had clear vision all around us. The sound of a grunt, an angry growl, and loud and irregular breathing patterns could be heard all around us. Quite frankly, I'll cut the bullshit. It sounded like a demon. It was from then we all had enough and rushed back home. None of us have been able to get our heads around this experience. Back home, he said that he felt the genuine presence of evil, and that when we were standing up, when he had been sitting down, he had seen a large black figure in the distance. We stayed up the whole remainder of the morning, trying to figure out what it was, when ultimately, it was denounced as an evil mystery.
This story happened about 2 years ago, and I still occasionally think about it. I live in the middle of Scotland. The winters are wet, cold, and immensely dark. One night, I was walking up to the shops at about 10 p.m. The path followed an area of interlocking, run-down terraces, encroaching forests, whose branches reached out across the path in several fields. With it being winter, the grass came up to your thigh. This journey, in total, usually takes about 30 minutes at least. On the right side of the latter area of the path is a series of mansions, about 5 or 6 of them all along this stretch. Most of the occupants would have been away for the winter, but one mansion was well lit. This mansion was just like the others, a posh estate building which was well kept as they usually are apart from the specifically placed ivy. It was a completely normal mansion. All the lights in the house were turned on, and in the windows I saw the shadows of dozens of people prancing around, dancing, having fun and drinking. Strange thing was, though, I couldn't hear anything. No voices, laughter, or music. Nothing at all. In all honesty, it looked like a fun party that I somehow felt I was allowed to go in with no problem. But I don't party with strangers, and I carried on to the shops and got what I needed. I left the shops. It had started snowing. The clouds covered so much of the sky that not even the light of the moon shone through. The snow was barreling down so much that I could barely see, but I kept going back down the path towards home. I decided to have another look at the park of the mansion, just out of curiosity. To my surprise, all I saw was nothing. The previously lively and decadent and gorgeous mansion was now a decaying relic. Its sides crumbling, its windows smashed, its roof caved in. The trimmed garden was now an overgrown jungle. Between me and walking back to my house had completely changed. I quickly walked home after seeing that. A year after that, me and a friend went to have a look at the house in the middle of a summer day. We didn't break into the house, and all of the doors were covered with metal locks. During one day, the house was kind of beautiful, like a little overgrown, isolated paradise with many kinds of beautiful and colorful flowers dotting around the area. All that we found was a shed, which inside was an abandoned workshop and a business card dated in 1996. I don't know what to think of the house. Did I imagine it? Was it squatters? In Scotland, there are so many stories of fairies creating visual illusions to lure humans to their world, which could explain the lack of sound. In all honesty, I don't know. I still walk past that mansion whenever I go to the shops. It's been gated up now and entirely covered in locks. Whatever mystery can be answered by going into the mansion itself, I'm not going to go look. I hope you like my story, Swamp. It's been puzzling me for years. My life in the rural Midwest has always been pretty mundane. I've always enjoyed being in and around the woods, hills, and rivers. Most of the friends I have today, many years later, are thanks to that. We all have lots of stories, but one sticks out above all others. A friend and I had set up camp in the woods along the Illinois River, many miles from the nearest town, which had maybe 1,000 people in it. We sat by the fire, tucking on a bottle of lemonade, vodka, and laughing, and attempting to catch and release small catfish while preparing to sleep because we had planned to leave early the following morning. Eventually, we hear the inevitable sounds of branches and slow crunching footsteps. We joke about it and remember a story passed around by the locals about a high school teacher who was approached by a panther while in the woods taking samples for her upcoming class. However, this particular part of Illinois is too north to see mountain lions or similar large cats, so we didn't worry much about it. The time comes for us to call it night. We bucket some water on the fire and head into the shelter. Only a few moments pass before we hear it. A rumbling noise, similar to a growling. It isn't necessarily feline, but it's obviously very close and somewhat terrifying. Eventually, we devised a plan. Stayed together, exit the shelter with our sleeping bags spread out around our upper bodies to appear larger than we actually were, weapons in hand. We shine all of our lights around and shout and kick and throw things. Almost immediately, we watched a very large cat leap from a low branch and lower itself into the weeds. We continued to shine our lights in that direction, but didn't see any sign of it. All those sounds of something moving slowly could still be heard nearby. We decided to relight the fire and stay awake until sunup, watching and listening for any signs of it. The sounds subsided after a while, and eventually the sun began to rise. We took down our makeshift shelter, gathered our backpacks, and walked towards the nearest tree line exit before continuing our journey. We both looked back at that day, wondering if we would have died if we were not well prepared.
So this was around, I say when I was 11 or 12. I know it was before I was 13 because my grandmother wasn't sick, and I didn't move from my state. This was in North Dakota on my reservation called Standing Rock. It was the beginning of October, and as always, I went out hunting. It was my passion, and I always enjoyed it every time I went out. One day, I went with my grandfather to hunt some squirrels in an oak wood patch that was next to the cornfield that was in a small ravine that leads to the Missouri River. We got a couple of pheasants in some bush, since we had tags for them. For being a tribe member, I got my tags for really cheap, so we got all the tags we could get. When we got to the oak wood patch, me and my grandfather got out of the truck and went down. There was a path that led into the oak patch that cattle used, so it was easy for us to get down into it. Me and my grandfather went deeper past a natural spring that was at the beginning of an oak wood patch of trees. We shot a couple of squirrels, but my grandfather's knees got the better of him. About halfway through the patch of trees, it was bigger than we both thought since we have never been in there before. We'd been out everywhere in the country where my grandparents lived. He then said to me, "I'm gonna head back to the truck. My knees are hurting too much." I looked at him and said, "Okay, can I go a little further?" He said it was fine to come back to the truck soon. So we went back to the truck and I headed further down into the ravine. I shot a few more squirrel and I felt that I had enough. My curiosity was getting the better of me though, and I decided to head a little bit further, since I had never been to this place before. I walked for about 10 more minutes until I saw a huge oak tree. This thing was very huge, the biggest I've ever seen in my life. It was at least 12 feet in diameter and probably like 130 feet tall. I sat there and stared at it in amazement for a few moments. But when I saw two pathways with the oak tree dividing them, one on my left to the river, since I could hear the water, that led into the woods, this ravine wasn't one I've seen before. I thought it would have an end by this point. I head to the left of the path to see the river and possibly find a new fishing spot. As soon as I got to the oak tree, literally across from me, if I extended my arm out, it would be facing directly at its side. I felt this thing like it was in danger, and I felt this uncomfortable feeling, which I rarely got when I was hunting, since I've been hunting all my life since I was young. This voice inside my head kept saying softly, "Joe." So softly it said it twice, but I ignored it. I walked and passed the oak tree and I jumped and staggered, almost falling onto my side as the voice yelled, "Don't go!" at me, and then I felt this feeling that I was in danger. I said to myself, something isn't right, so I started to head back to the truck. And the whole time I felt like I was being watched. Hairs on the back of my neck were standing up, until I came up into this incline in the ravine, and I stopped where I saw this black little thing looking at me at the base of a tree. It was like it was smiling at me evilly. I stared at it and kept my 12-gauge shotgun at the ready. I walked slowly further away, watching it, then looking away at the corner of my eye. I saw this all black skinny thing hiding behind a tree. I was scared, but I stepped forwards with my shotgun. I put my aim at it and kept on hiding behind the tree. It was peeking out slightly, like it was scared of me. This thing was all black, tall, and skinny with long arms and legs. I have never seen anything like this in my life, but for some reason, lyrics of the songs that were my favorite were singing in my head. Songs of the Cast and Crown, such as Who Am I, and songs from Mercy Me, I Can Only Imagine. I was raised Christian and I sang them out loud as I walked closer. I didn't feel that feeling of danger. I felt being watched, though. As soon as I got to the beginning of the ravine, I saw the truck. I felt released. At last. I then looked behind me and I didn't see anything. I walked back up to the truck and got in and we left. Now, I didn't tell my grandfather about it. When he asked how was it, I don't know why I didn't tell him or anyone else, maybe because I thought they would probably think I'm crazy. But I just told him it was good, and we left. To this day, I don't know what it was. I'm English and love the outdoors. I do loads of hiking on my own in the Lake District. I had a lot of work up there around this time, and it meant being away from my family. But I loved and embraced the solitude when I got the chance. I'm actually collecting the Wainwrights, which means getting to the top of all 214 peaks in Cumbria. I'm at about 140 at the moment. So really experienced and very careful to know when I'm on both GPS and paper maps. About 5 years ago, I was walking a route around some of the bigger mountains. One of the peaks on this walk is called Great N, and the suggested route seemed too far away, so I thought I'd check for other paths that were closer to where I was. I looked at the map and found that there was a path right next to me. So, I looked and saw a slightly trod path heading up, not too steep from where I was standing. There was a bit of ice and snow on the side, but nothing put me off. As I said, it wasn't steep, but after 30 seconds on this path, I all of a sudden started panicking. Normally, I'm really level-headed. I couldn't work out what was wrong, but a nasty feeling came over me, like an impending doom. I thought I needed to call this one off as I really didn't feel right. I turned to head back down the path and couldn't believe it. I somehow managed to walk up a near vertical cliff, covered in snow. The only way down was to shuffle on my backside, and even when I could have slipped up somehow. Any wrong move could have killed me. I had been using my telescopic walking pole on the way up, but could not find it anywhere. Now, this is a busy part of the world, and it was a beautiful day, but there wasn't a soul to be seen. It took me about 20 minutes to shuffle down this icy slope and back onto the path. I looked back to where I come from. I could clearly see that this was not a path, but a really dangerous and cracky buttress. I could see the point where I had decided to turn back, and there is no way I could have gotten there without climbing, and absolutely no way could I have done it in 30 seconds. I look at the map again, and the path that I had spotted was a lot further around the base. It was really creepy. It still freaks me out to this day that I somehow lost all of that time. 5 to 10 minutes maybe. It somehow ended up in a place that I definitely wasn't before. Has anybody ever experienced this? And does anybody know what it could have been?
When I bought this property a couple of years ago, one of the main selling points was the woods. Between the house and the road are rows and rows of red pine, roughly 5 acres and standing maybe 35 to 40 feet tall. Walking through these woods gives off an eerie feeling, but enjoyable still. The ground covered by many thick needles giving off a spring step when trekking through. Behind the home are more of a wild side landscape with many different trees, a creek, and a winding path that's just wide enough for a small utility vehicle. These woods, the kids and I enjoyed most. We have done a few projects such as build a small wooden bridge to get to the other side of the creek. We made a rope swing, and they all have their own battery-operated vehicles to drive the path if they wanted to. One thing we did do last year looking back is we found a huge pile of rocks in the middle of nowhere. The rocks varied in size from a handful to a little over a bowling ball size. Well, we were pulling rocks off that pile as if there was something buried inside. We never found anything other than more rocks. The pile of rocks may be 10 feet long, 8 feet wide, and maybe 3 feet tall. We dug down deep enough to see the rocks that were buried in the ground, so we stopped. I am thinking now that maybe it wasn't such a good idea. In recent past, our family had dealt with something I thought would never happen, and that was a ghost or ghost in our home. The first story written explains the details in that, but this happened to my home. I and my wife talked about this with friends and family, but nobody else after that. I live in a small city, and talking with them, stories of this property began slowly coming out of the woodwork. The following stories below are accounts from what we heard happening in these woods. My wife spoke to her sister and her sister's husband. Her husband recalls 3 stories of the previous owner's experience. 2 of them, he claims he can't remember, but I am taking it as either he's making it up to scare us or he just refuses to tell. The one experience he did say was the man that lived there chose to never take trees from the woods. The main source of heating for the house is a wood stove. He never hunted these woods either. I spoke to a friend of mine, who we will call Bert's, about the haunted house incident. Bert has been hunting in the woods behind this property for many years and decided to tell me of his experiences, of what has happened to him and many hunters, including his young nephew now. Going out in the early hours before sunrise, everyone seems to see a silhouette of a man walking around, and when approached, he disappears. Other accounts are there is a light they see about the side of a credit card flying around, and that too often, when approached, disappears. The one event that kind of sent chills up his spine was one morning. He was up in a tree, all set up and waiting as hunters do. He saw a light down below the bottom of the tree just sitting there. So he called out and asked who it was. He got no answer. He became angry that this person was messing with his hunting site, so he began to threaten him or her. The light stayed right at the bottom, so Bert climbed down, and as he climbed down, he saw the light move away. He said he chased this light a good 40 yards or so, then it just disappeared. He says he remembers standing there in a thick fog, and all of a sudden, debris from up above the tree such as leaves, twigs, and other things came falling down upon him. As he looked up, this huge gust of wind, strong enough to almost knock him down, came rushing in. He says he doesn't hunt alone anymore. Another friend, who is a volunteer for the fire department, told me they were called out there about a fire about 6 years ago. Apparently, half of those houses caught on fire, but luckily no one was hurt or in the home at the time of the fire. He said it was strange because they could not find the source of the fire. He said that while they were there, he saw someone standing just inside the yard by the woods for a glimpse, and when he turned to catch up with them, there was no one there. He said he had an eerie feeling about the woods. He told his supervisor about it, but they never believed him. They thought maybe it was just some kind of smoke inhalation or something causing him to see that. Okay, these are the stories I've heard during my time. I have not had any experiences myself in these woods, nor my kids, but recently an event has happened with someone I know from work. I have had some raccoon problems in the last few weeks as well. We have, or should I say, have 6 chickens. In 2 evenings, we had lost 2 to the raccoons. We know they are raccoons because we saw them from the 2nd floor looking out the window in the evening. A coworker of mine, who we will call Billy, overheard me telling another about losing my chickens, and he had offered his services to come out and exterminate them. Awesome. We agreed for him to come out on a Saturday evening, and he and his friends would come out and camp out for a couple of hours around the chicken coop late at night to pick off them as they came. Around 8:30 in the morning, they pulled into the driveway, got their gear, and decided to change of plan. Because the layout of the property in woods, they first were going to check the abandoned camper, then patrol the pines, then patrol the woods in the back. Within 10 minutes, I received a text from them saying they got a huge one in the camper, and were now going to patrol the pines. I replied, "But great job, guys, but be careful in the pines. There are a couple of deep bunkers with the pines, and you don't want to trip on them, because you could get really hurt." About 15 minutes later, I walked out on the deck from the 2nd floor and saw them coming back. I asked how it went, and they told me they thought they better come back to the house. What had happened was that they walked deep within looking up the pines to pick them out of the trees, and they heard branches and needles crunching from what they thought was a coyote. They looked out in the snow, and they had seen some tracks. The noises grew, and it seemed like there were more than one now. They felt that they were being circled. Worried that they stumbled upon a den, they hightailed it back to the house. They said they were going to walk into the backwoods now. I thought maybe this wasn't a good idea, so I tried to talk them out of it. I told them I had heard stories of those woods in the dark. Their reply was that they have dealt with scary things in the woods before, and that they would be fine. "Okay then, and good luck on your journey, and I shall see you on the other side," I told them, and I went back inside. About 10 minutes later, I received a text. "We are leaving." I walked outside to catch up with them before they left for the night. Before they walked down the woods, I saw 2 young men with their firearms, confident and all rambled up for the extermination. When I saw them on the return, they were 3 shades whiter, eyes wide open, and they were talking so fast I had to ask them to slow down. One of them just put his guns away and got right into the truck. Billy explained to me what had happened. They walked down the path, and while walking, they felt they were being watched. They heard a big crack of a branch on the ground behind them. They quickly turned around and flashed their spotlight and saw nothing. No noise of an animal running away, no broken branches, just nothing. They continued down the path, and about midway, Billy saw what had looked like a glowing white blob, he says, roughly about 5 feet tall and hovering. They flashed a light on it, and it looked like it moved so fast it was a blur and disappeared. Talking to each other, asking if they saw it, and just then the branches and twigs crunched behind them. The others saw it again, and as they flashed a light, again it disappeared. This happened 2 more times, each time appearing to get closer and closer. It was messing with them, appearing behind them. This was when I received the text, and they ran back to the house. Billy told this story to many co-workers at my place of employment, and of course he got a hard time for it. No one believes his story nor mine of the house, and that's okay. There are now 3 guys at work who are planning on walking the woods to debunk his story. I am unsure if this is a good idea or not, but I am leaning towards letting them. Yesterday, I had told a friend online about what's going on in the woods. She told me Em may sound crazy, but she may have an idea what it is. She is into Fae lore. She told me it sounds like a dark fairy. She doesn't remember the name, but she's thinking it's a Maro fairy. She says that this fairy, which can be 5 foot tall I guess, walks the wood and eats bones. Bones from animals, of course, that have been killed. She says they protect their woods from their stash. They normally don't harm humans, but are known to play and chase. A way to test it would to be bringing a chicken bone, throw it away into a circle, and see if it's gone the next day. I am leaning more of a ghost than a fairy, but what do I know?